Hello and welcome to Coast AM's official YouTube channel. I'm your host, George Norrie. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And you can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and of course, on coasttocoastam.com. The fellow believes that an inquiry into the disappearance of original footage from the first moon landing in 1969 and then the whereabouts of lunar rock, which was brought back to Earth during several sessions. They're confused. They want to know what's going on. Now, this story's been breaking all around the planet, and some of it is distorted. In a moment, our science advisor and head of the EnterpriseMission.com, Richard C. Hoagland, he joins us to talk about this and much more on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast to Coast. We've got a great couple hours here for you. Richard Hoagland, our science advisor, head of the EnterpriseMission.com. He monitors a lot of these stories and sends me emails constantly saying, George, you got to look at this story. What about this one? He's also a noted author, Dark Mission, Monuments of Mars as well. And Richard, come on, because this story that you sent us, there's some confusion worldwide over the Russians because some publications said that they were questioning whether we even made it to the moon. I don't think that's the case. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, you got to know how newspapers work. There are two separate sets of writers in newspapers and in all big media news organizations. You got the article itself written by a journalist.
Yeah.
Then you've got a group of people called headline writers.
Mm-hmm.
And their job, particularly on the Internet, is to create what's called clickbait. They want you to click on the story, so they hype the headline, make it as exaggerated and extraordinary as possible, so it's irresistible for you not to click. And newspapers, in this competition with media sources, has kind of taken up, anew that whole procedure.
Right.
This goes back to the old Hearst yellow journalism days, like a century ago. The Washington Post, which of course is supposed to be a very reputable mainstream newspaper, had a totally wrong headline. It says that they were questioning in the headline. In fact, let me scroll up here and actually read it to you verbatim.
Well, here, I've got it if you don't.
It says, Russian official wants to investigate whether U.S. moon landings happened. Wrong. That is not what Vladimir, Markin, I guess, Markin, said in the Izvestia op-ed, and Izvestia is, of course, the official Russian, Kremlin. It used to be the communist newspaper. The Moscow Times is an English translation for English-speaking readers in Europe and in the United States, and I find it interesting that the Post piece keeps talking about according to a translation by the Moscow Times, like, the Russian, published Moscow Times is going to get the translation wrong. So if you read carefully what he actually says, this is Markin now, he says, we are not contending that they, meaning NASA, did not fly to the moon and simply made a film about it. These scientific or perhaps cultural artifacts are part of the legacy of humanity, and their disappearance without a trace is our common law. An investigation will reveal what happened, he said in the Moscow Times translation. Now, if you parse that sentence, there's some stunning, absolutely mind-blowing details, factual details. Did you pick up on the really amazing part of that sentence? He says, but all these scientific or perhaps cultural artifacts. What cultural artifacts?
Exactly. Were they?
Is he talking about stuff the astronauts found and brought back? Actual ancient ET equipment? Photographs of ruins? Photographs of domes? I mean, this is such a pointed jab at the heart of the NASA cover-up. For the last 50 years, George, this is why I said to you, we got to do something on this because everybody's getting it wrong.
Now, the significance of the missing moon rock. We know that Neil Armstrong, for example, had a closet full of rocks. We're not talking about that. Might those...
Well, hang on. No. He had a bag with equipment that was used as part of the EVA he didn't have any rocks in that bag.
All right, see, that could be another article then. That's spoiled.
It was just cameras and brackets and stuff like that. The fact that they single out 400 missing pounds of moon rock is kind of intriguing. And the fact that, again, Markin says scientific or perhaps cultural artifacts. I mean, that's a very precise term. Have you ever heard anybody in connection with the moon landings talk about artifacts except me?
Just you. Just you. And then the late Ingo Swann about his structures on the far side in his book
With
Penetration. But that's about it. So what's the significance of the missing rock? I mean, could they contain some kind of biological life forms that are in the rock, microbes, what?
Well, remember, rock is a kind of a generic term. We went to the moon to bring back moon rocks, right?
Right.
So why talk about scientific or perhaps cultural? Or cultural, that's anthropology. That's culture. That's living people. That's ancient civil. This is such a stunning shot across the bow by Putin, because you realize that there's no official in Moscow these days that's going to do this on his own, right?
Exactly.
This
is
do not
sanctioned.
have a democratic society anymore. Putin is the dictator. Putin is in charge of invasions of places like the Crimea and the Ukraine, and threatening us about various things, nuclear weaponry and flying huge bombers close to the U.S. mainland, et cetera, for the last couple of years. So this I take politically, and it would be really interesting for you to talk to some other political experts. I mean, of all the things going on this planet right now that the Russians and we are concerned about, the last thing I would imagine, and I'm pretty close to this, so this would be, probably on my number one list, but realistically, the last thing I would have expected Putin to be concerned with is the NASA Apollo landings.
It's a great story, Richard. We're going to follow up more with you when we come back on Coast to Coast AM. And you're going to want to get to our website, coasttocoastam.com, to look at some of the pictures that Richard has sent us, and Sean has got them posted up there for you. So make sure you're ready for that. He'll be going through some of those tonight, too. And welcome back to Coast to Coast. Richard C. Hoagland with us tonight. Richard, so other than stirring up the old beehive, why would the Russians care about films and footage and moon rock? Why would they bring this up now?
Well, the standard response to the folks that claim we never went to the moon is that if we never went, the Russians, who of course were in a head-to-head competition with us back in the Soviet era, would have blown the whistle and would have, raised holy hell and would have let everybody know that the Americans were welching out and they were cheating and all this other stuff, right?
Yeah, of course.
Now, 50 years later, we have a high official, obviously at Putin's discretion, sending a shot across the bow on the very thing that the moon hoaxers claim is their holy grail. That the fact that if the moon landing did not happen, that the Russians would have blown the whistle. Well, the Russians are now blowing the whistle, but they're not, as I read a moment ago, claiming that NASA never went. They're claiming NASA has hidden crucial data, information, rocks, samples, and cultural artifacts.
I love that.
This is just so mind-blowing that even I can think some pretty far-out things, George, as you know.
Yes, you can.
I find it hard to get my mind around this, because what it means is that what Putin is doing is driving a dagger through the heart of the deepest, most extraordinary secret of the West, of the United States in specific. Not of this administration, not of the previous, Bush administrations, not of Clinton, but going all the way back to Kennedy and right after, in terms of what happened vis-a-vis Nixon and the landings on the moon. And they must have known then, given the language. Again, diplomatic language is very precise. You would not bring up cultural artifacts unless you're basically saying to those that have been keeping this lie going for 50 years, if you don't do what we want, fill in the blank, we're going to expose your greatest, most embarrassing secret. I mean, Brian Williams just was demoted from NBC to MSNBC.
That's right.
For telling a few white lies and some exaggerations about some of the things that he went through in the course of his 20-plus year career, right?
That's right.
So it's all about credibility. If the Russians really can prove, if they can put data on the table that NASA has been hiding stuff, amazing, extraordinary stuff, can you imagine how that would change the tables on major things going on right now? For instance,
it'd be huge.
It would kick the Iranian nuclear negotiations into a cocked hat, because the Iranians could claim, with the backing of their Russian allies, well, we can't trust the United States. Look what they lied about to their own people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And again, we're not talking about that the landings never took place. We're talking about our scenario, our enterprise model, which is, yeah, NASA went, they damn well went, and they hid all the good stuff for over half a century, and the Russians are now raising this little flag and saying, we ought to look at this, ladies and girls and boys and gentlemen and all that.
How do they know to bring this up, or are they just guessing?
Well, for the last several years, we haven't really talked about it a lot on your show, but the Russians have invited me repeatedly to be interviewed on their major official ITAR TASS net. It's kind of like the Russian version of the Associated Press. And a couple of years ago, there was a documentary. They came here to Albuquerque, and we went up to the Sandias, and I sat for hours and hours, and they filmed me doing the accutron measurements during a transit of Venus across the sun. And they put all this together in a documentary that was aired to about 120 million Russians from the east part of Russia to the western part of Russia, as I said, about 24 months ago. And I have been on the cover of one of their major magazines. They have like 4 colorful glossy magazines like what we used to have here, the Saturday Evening Post and Collier's and all that.
Yeah.
Well, this Russian magazine has repeatedly asked me for interviews and for images and for data and background information, and I was going to send like some of that to put up tonight, actually, Sean
tonight.
But they only sent it to me as JPEG screen grabs. I don't have a direct link, so I thought it might be too complex, particularly since it's all in Russian except for the photographs, which are of me and of artifacts and things that I'm talking about. So it seems, and again, it's not too far to extrapolate, that somebody in Russia, in fact, at one point, the reporter who has been repeatedly asking me for all this stuff over the years, she pointedly told me in an email that I had to hurry by getting her some stuff because she had to go to the Kremlin.
Whoa.
And then she sent me a picture of herself standing in Red Square in color in front of the Kremlin. The Russians love convoluted symbolic coding and messages and all this stuff. They're much more Byzantine than we in the West are. So I think somebody somewhere might have been reading what I've been sending them.
That's possible.
And maybe they did their own checking if they didn't have archives. And somebody says, for God's sake, look what NASA's been hiding.
What
This would be an incredible edge in this geopolitical new war between us and the Russians, right?
Of the missing films, the missing rocks, these so-called
missing videotape,
these artifacts, which really excites you the most here? The artifacts?
Oh, the artifacts.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because the artifacts, if they're what we think they are, obviously, given what we see in the images, the astronauts could have picked up anything and brought it back and have spent the last 50 years back engineering to try to figure out how it works and putting it to use in various black ops projects, things like, I hate this term, free energy devices, anti-gravity technology, replicators from Star Trek where you basically tap into the ether or the torsion field and you can make any material in any size, any shape, any color, at any time, anywhere. I mean, just let your imagination roam. If you tapped into the remains of an ancient ET civilization on the moon, a Type 2 civilization able to manipulate the vacuum and create matter and energy out of nothing, there's no limit to what we could back engineer, given that we could recreate a science in secret to figure out how this darn stuff worked and maybe replicate it. The Russians are aiming an arrow at the heart of the cover-up by saying these scientific or perhaps cultural artifacts, the or perhaps cultural is so telling. It's so leading the witness. And I'm sorry, the Washington Post headline writer completely blew it in terms of the nubbin of what this story really could mean.
Have they retracted that headline at all?
No, nothing. And, of course, why would they? Because the job of the U.S. press is to assist NASA in keeping the cover-up going. Gosh, did I just say that? Yes, I did. Remember how years ago the CIA bragged that it had correspondents and journalists in every major news organization?
Yep.
Well, if they're there, their job is to, A, find out things, and B, to keep things they don't want published from being published. I find it really interesting that all over Travel Channel and Sci-Fi Channel and the Science Channel and every Discovery and all that, there are endless UFO documentaries. Endless. Can you remember the last time that there was any high-profile documentary on our work on artifacts, cultural artifacts left by ETs elsewhere in the solar system, beginning with the moon?
Other than an occasional Ancient Alien episode, nothing as in terms of a documentary.
And that's all with Mike Barra, but not specifically with me. They will not come near me.
Why not?
Because the fix is in. They know I'm not going to lie. I'm going to tell the truth, and I'm going to put them on the spot. I'm going to bring up specific data. I've got stunning imagery.
I'm going to have Tom mention that. We just unfortunately taped year 8, but if they go to year 9, you should be in there.
Yes, I should, of course.
You should have been in year 1.
Let me tell you one exception to that. That was the Sci-Fi Channel. Remember a couple of years ago, the Sci-Fi Channel did a whole big thing on 2012, The Secret of 2012?
Yes, I do.
They profiled our physics work, our torsion field physics measurements, and they literally sent a crew with Robin and me to Teotihuacan.
I remember that.
And then to Tikal. And then, and I want to really congratulate this journalist who was the anchor of that show. His name happens to be now a household word. I want to congratulate Lester Holt for becoming the first black journalist to take over the anchorship of the NBC Evening News, the first mainstream evening network broadcast by a black journalist. And it was Lester who interviewed me in person, stomping around Tikal, asking me all the interesting questions about who built it and what the physics showed and what the graph showed and what this could mean. It may be that this being on the outs with major media will change now that the Russians have suddenly said there could be cultural artifacts on the moon. I mean, I used to joke with various people that the quickest way to Washington to blow the cover-up wide open was through Moscow. And lo and behold.
Here you are. 2 remaining astronauts from the Apollo 11 mission. Buzz Aldrin, Michael Collins, the forgotten astronaut. He's 84. Of course, he was in the Lunar Commander up there, so the command module, he just kept going around the moon. I don't think Aldrin has talked about this, has he?
Yes. Aldrin actually accosted a dear friend of mine.
Accosted?
Yes. He almost came to blows after an Academy Awards evening.
All right, you're not saying Bart Sabrell, are you?
No. I'm saying Buzz Aldrin. I have a very good, well-known Hollywood producer, Paul. Oh my God, I'm forgetting his last name. Paul. Come on, help somebody.
That's okay. We'll get it. What was he in? What did he do?
Huh? Well, he works. He's done a whole bunch of. First of all, he did a Major Roswell special. That's how we met decades ago. And we've been trying to float around Hollywood for years a fictional movie on the Cydonia investigation. And we actually had a deal with RKO for a while until somehow it got, nixed. And there have been other places where people said initially, we're intrigued, and then, no, go away, we don't care. So this producer...
Was it Paul Shapiro?
Into it.
Was it Paul Shapiro?
No. God, I'm really drawing a blank tonight.
I can't help you.
Anyway, he's probably sitting there by the radio going, Hoagland.
How could you forget me?
Yeah. Anyway, so he and Aldrin and Paul, had this outright confrontation in the Kodak Theater after one of the Academy Award evenings over whether Hoagland's nuts and crazy, as Aldrin claimed, or whether, as my friend claimed, I actually was onto something and it should be further investigated. And a whole bunch of people, apparently in their evening gowns and their tuxes and all that, gathered around as these two guys, had at it in the middle of a public gathering, all over whether Hoagland is nuts to claim that there's stuff on the moon.
I've got to tell you, Richard, over the 12, 13 years that you and I have known each other, have been friends, have been on this program with me, everything you have said has eventually come true. Whether it was water on the moon or water on Mars or anything, eventually science catches up to what you have said on this program years gone back. So I'm not doubting you anymore. Not that I ever did. But you're way ahead of the curve, way ahead.
Well, thank you. And, if you live long enough, you do find that if you follow a scientific method, which we try to do over here, regardless of what some of my critics claim from time to time, eventually other people will come to the same conclusion. Now, I don't know whether the Russians are speaking from their own archive of knowing that NASA has hidden amazing stuff, or whether, as I said a few moments ago, they've been reading what the Russian, correspondents at TASS and other magazines have been asking in terms of these documentarians. I mean, they've actually sent crews twice to New Mexico to talk to me at great length and put it on the air and on the official state Russian television channels. But regardless of how this all comes down, they're now on the 46th anniversary of the Apollo 11 landing, opening the door to something which has been persona non grata, namely the idea that NASA's hiding not just the videotape and not just the rocks, but scientific or perhaps, I love that, or perhaps cultural artifacts on which in terms of a legacy for all humanity, and their disappearance without a trace is our common loss, they say. I couldn't have said it better myself.
What do you think these artifacts might be?
Where?
What?
Well, as I said a moment ago, they could be anything. They could be energy stuff. They could be, archives.
Do you think they're ours, left there from past civilizations, or something that ETs may have left?
Well, it could be both.
Or both.
Remember, we live now in a solar system which we know has been inhabited for a very, very, very long time in terms of our data and our analysis. Whether there have been previous epochs of high civilization on Earth which have tried to do earlier what Apollo did, go to the moon, go to Mars, go to the asteroid belt, and find out about their heritage, I can't say for certain, but the data is looking provocative that we are not the first, that there were other guys, our great-great-great-great-great ancestors, who tried to track back their history to this ancient, truly ancient, solar system-wide, Type 2, incredibly sophisticated civilization. So we don't know whether the astronauts brought back the really ancient stuff, which I doubt simply because anything on the surface that's really, really old has been battered to hell by micrometeorite abrasion and bombardment. So you'd have to go inside. You'd have to go down in the moon in the preserved spaces underground, maybe even a half a mile down to get to areas that are untouched by the surface bombardment of meteors and asteroids and comets and stuff like that. But more recent stuff, let's say there was a high-tech civilization 30,000 years ago on the Earth, as other people, John Anthony West and many others, have said, that kind of technology, if it was found on the moon, should be in pretty good condition because 30,000 years on the moon is almost nothing.
That's right.
So if they brought back some of the more recent stuff from more recent civilizations, that would suffice.
How amazing that would be. Now, the fact that they know that they had it and now it's gone or hidden, what does that tell you?
Well, it tells you there's a political tidal wave, a tsunami coming, and what they've done is they pulled out the big guns. Because remember, this is the thing that they would do anything to keep secret.
Right.
I had an intel, friend of mine, a consultant, someone that I've talked to for years and years and years. when we were discussing hyperdimensional torsion field physics one night. And he told me flatly that they, meaning the folks that run the planet, that run the world, regardless of country, regardless of culture, they would do anything to keep that kind of technology out of the hands of ordinary people, up to and including, and this is a direct quote, losing a major American city to nuclear terrorism. Because the other side of this technology, George, which we've figured out by back engineering, starting with the stuff on Mars and then going our own experiments and looking at lots and lots of papers published over the decades, particularly from the Russian side. The Russians are much more up on torsion field physics since AdRev than we have publicly ever admitted. We know that there is a technology that can be actively used to suppress nuclear explosions and weaponry. Let me repeat that. There is a torsion field technology, which I believe the Black Ops crowd on this side of the former Iron Curtain is in possession of and knows how to work, which can suppress nuclear technology, be it fission or fusion or bombs, whatever, which of course makes the whole Iranian deal kind of moot. And again, it's almost like kabuki theater. It's like we live in two different universes where there's a real physics and a real science and a real series of stunning discoveries. And then there's all this fake stuff and the fake headlines and the fake soap opera that we're led around by the nose thinking is really important. And what the Russians are doing in this proposal is they're throwing again a shot across the bow of the secret inside science and physics and technology that we will blow the whistle unless, unnamed, you do X that we want.
We're going to come back with more with Richard C. Hoagland in just a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Thank you for listening to Coast AM on our official YouTube channel. I'm your host, George Norrie, and don't forget to visit the Coast Insider membership area on coasttocoastam.com, where you can access our past, upcoming, and classic shows.